Okay, everyone saw the title, and the short answer, before we even get started with the whole discussion, is yes. Of course, Destiny 2 has some sort of a future, but the question is how bright is that future? I anticipate a massive fall off in its player base over the next few months, and I will do my best to articulate why. Over the past few weeks, I have been diving heavily into the Destiny 2 experience. I have leveled multiple characters, completed the raid, participated in trials, and a whole slew of other activities that I've gone through in a pretty typical roller coaster of opinions as I explore the entirety of the game. Now that that's over though, I wanted to stand back and bring up some different points as well as examine the potential short and long-term future of the game. When first jumping into the Destiny 2 experience, I was greeted with something far different than what I was expecting. Now, this is not to say that it was bad, but upon reaching max level and completing the campaign, arguably getting to the point where the Destiny experience truly takes shape, its endgame, I was expecting a system where progression was slower, but consistent. Grinding would mean power level increases, and there would be a point of diminishing returns where I got just about as high as I could, and would have to wait for the raid and other additional endgame content, maybe DLC, but that's not what I found. Admittedly, this sort of progression did happen for a short period, but it was more of a situation where I turned in various tokens to planetary vendors, completed a couple of very easy milestones, and accelerated right up to the high 200s. After doing these things, I was then met with the first soft cap barrier. Now, this experience was honestly a lot better for me than many other players. The reason being, I saved up my reward tokens as well as my milestones and specific quest objectives, and pretty much used them in the optimal way in order to increase power efficiently by coincidence. But that was not, and still is not true right now, for everyone. Many players new to the Destiny universe, or grind-heavy loot-based games in general, in this case a pretty big number considering the scope of Destiny 2's marketing and launch numbers, may not have had these instincts, these initial instincts when going through the game, and a lot of players turned in tokens or completed milestones very early on, sometimes before they could even receive valuable rewards from them at all. This left them stranded, and a great deal of players got stuck, quote-unquote stuck, at various power levels in the mid-200s only a few days after release. Luckily for us, a workaround became known, which revolved around creating a fresh character of the same class as your original, leveling it through the extremely short campaign, and then doing all of the rewarding activities again with all of your old gear equipped. This leapfrog system became very, very popular and allowed players to accelerate quickly, get unstuck, and have a much better experience. Bungie soon responded, but not in a way that I personally feel was good for the game at all. The response was a stealth nerf of the method, thus making a second character reward nothing of value from a lot of the main activities they were being used for. This change was not at first communicated clearly to players, which isn't a good sign, especially since it hugely impacted a very big chunk of the user base. For hardcore gamers with an abundance of time, it didn't really matter at all since we, and I do include myself in this category, had already moved far beyond the point we had previously been stuck at, as had many others. But for other players, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that this other group, is a majority. It meant they had one less tool to advance their characters. And in a looter game such as Destiny 2, progression is one of the largest factors keeping gamers logged in. Moving forward, after a little over a week of live servers, the Leviathan raid released. This was one of the big things the community was waiting for, and a large audience held its breath and waited to see the competition for world's first completion. Destiny's raid content is undeniably one of its core strengths, and also a valuable tool in the progression of a Guardian's power. At first, I marveled at the raid honestly, since I enjoyed overcoming obstacles and solving puzzles, and I really have as a gamer for a long time now. The first few run-throughs in which I intentionally experimented and learned the raid mechanics for myself, rather than simply scouting for tips and guides, were the absolute best. But over time, I, as well as many other gamers, this is kind of a rapidly changing perspective on the raid recently, have developed a different opinion. After going through the honeymoon stage of learning the raid, the mechanics, etc., I came to the realization that this was likely going to be a regular part of my Destiny 2 life, at least for a couple months. And once that started to sink in, my mentality just very quickly changed. The Leviathan raid, at its core, I believe, is an attempted departure from the standard kill some monsters, do something specific, shoot a boss, and then repeat. That's kind of true in almost every boss encounter now with shooting games like this. You do something, some trigger happens, you shoot the boss, you get some damage in, and then the whole phase resets. but what it achieved more so than anything else is an oppressive tedium of relying on every single team member to get every single tiny movement, shot, and call out exactly right 100% of the time, or the entire team dies immediately. This raid has almost no opportunities for players to be a hero, to make plays, or to carry and feel super powerful. That's what a lot of players look for, the ability to go in and feel godlike. You can't do that in this raid. Instead, it's just a collection of admittedly slightly interesting encounters the first time, strung together with mediocre rewards. When I put in as much work as I have with a raid like the Leviathan, I personally expect an explosion of loot. Maybe not all of it godlike, but some of it powerful and worth the trouble. What we get though, in most circumstances for most players that complete it, is a bunch of tokens turned into a vendor at the base of the social hub who gives you items that are guaranteed to be lower than your current power level. I don't know about everyone else out there, but when I do something like a raid and complete it and have all these leftover, for instance, tokens, even though I would prefer the actual loot from the encounters themselves, and I turn them in, I don't want to get something that isn't an upgrade. I would love to get something that is an actual upgrade. Again, progression is so valuable in games like this. All in all, I have gone through a progression of, in my mentality, wow, this is interesting, not what I was expecting. 2, after that, this is kind of tedious, and there are way too many wipes caused by tiny little discrepancies. On to, after that, this is annoying, I don't want to do this, I don't even get rewards that justify it. Which is a very bad sign when considering the fact that the Leviathan, right now, is the pinnacle of Destiny 2 PvE. Next up, Trials came to town, and I will spare you the long backstory and details on why this is the case, but the gist of it is this. Destiny 2 PvP has been completely transformed. Every single mode is now 4v4 with the hope of creating a more competitive scene, which undoubtedly indicates an esports push in my eyes. The result is a success on some fronts and an epic failure on others. While the PvP is indeed more competitive now than it has ever been, and many players argue that it is at its all-time high in terms of mechanical technical balancing, the objective reality is that the vast majority of players are using specifically scout rifles, and among those scout rifles, an emphasis on the Mida multi-tool. It's just an easy one to acquire, it's an exotic, it has built-in movement speed, it pairs very nicely with an SMG. There's a reason why they're using this particular one, but if this one were gone, I've talked to some of my, more fluent Destiny PvP friends, and they have strongly indicated to me that it would just be replaced by a different scout rifle, which is likely true. So scout rifles right now are the pinnacle of the item class being used in PvP, and the Mida multi-tool is the one of the scout rifles that's being used by everyone. Trials of the 9 takes place on one single map each weekend, and due to a nasty bug involving shooting through floors, the same map was even used 2 weeks in a row. So we have the same map constantly with the same gun all the time. This will be shaken up slightly when they get the new map squared away, but it will still be an entire weekend of one map, basically just one gun, and likely identical strategies being used by both teams. Lastly, a huge chunk of players do not have dedicated squad members or a reliable team to run with, especially the more casual Guardians, some of which are picking up the Destiny experience for the first time. And that group will likely never even be able to participate at all in the raid or Trials of the 9, and are left with a couple of specific outcomes upon reaching level 20. Situation number 1, they don't do anything right. They turn in their tokens at the wrong time, they do their milestones too early, which is very easy to do, a lot of players have done it, and they get stuck grinding heroic public events for an extended duration of time. Honestly though, this is not too bad. I don't mean to be too negative about public events. Their loot rewards and their completion time feel pretty good, so this is actually one of the better options for allowing a player to get quite a bit more time and enjoyment out of the game as a whole as they slowly power up their gear to the mid or upper 260s. After that point, they are stuck waiting for the Tuesday reset, after which they complete a couple of activities that take maybe 2 hours, and they have their minimal power boost for the week. Situation number 2. The player does in fact use their reputation rewards to maximum value. They do the milestones the right way, and they get to that mid to upper 260s cap immediately after they get to level 20. They are then pretty much stuck in the same situation, the same exact situation as the previous player, waiting for Tuesday to do a couple hours of work, maybe, and advance a couple of power levels. Now, I don't mean to make it seem like the game does not have value or that I have not greatly enjoyed it thus far. In fact, I have loved a ton of the content, but when peeling back some of the fanboy in me, taking a long hard look at the roadmap for the game and the progression issues already rearing their head, I am forced to draw the conclusion that the game's player base is likely going to tank over the coming weeks and months. This is by no means to say that I think the game will die or become unpopulated, but the tagline, Destiny 1.5, specifically because players do not feel there's enough material to constitute the number 2 at the end, is in use, and it is being used by a lot of people. Me personally, I don't view Destiny 1.5 as an insult. Destiny the original had a lot of things going for it, and a lot of people liked it. You don't want to make a sequel that isn't in touch with the original. You wouldn't want, like, Lord of the Rings 4, if it ever existed, to have all new characters, new races, space travel, alien lasers everywhere. You wouldn't want any of that. But bottlenecking the progression down to one and done, like really just quickly knocked out every Tuesday, quickly completed milestones once per week, or extremely long, tedious, frustrating cooperative raids or PvP events only on weekends spells disaster in terms of maintaining the player base that's been pumped sky high with marketing campaigns and pre-release hype trains. I anticipate a player base drop-off, and a big one at that, and honestly, probably a reversal of the hype train with articles like, Destiny 2 has lost over 80% of its player base, exclamation point, 500 exclamation points, with some clickbait videos to boot. But if that day does roll around, let's remember the roadmap from the original game. Over time, with hard work, some well-crafted DLCs, revamped content, and probably a lot of money sunk in as well, it reached ever-increasing heights, and I believe the same will be true of Destiny 2. It's just that this, the game we are playing right now, cannot sustain over 1 million concurrent players as it has recently boasted to hold. That's going to wrap it up, guys. Hopefully this was a decent video to watch. It's a bit of a departure from my previous guide content, but rest assured that will continue if I can think of the right videos to do. And if you want to support, please check out the links below. There are the upper echelon forums where I'll try to organize events and schedules, an Amazon link if you want to support for free, a Facebook group, and much, much more. Thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.